listening.
I want to watch the news.
Are you making headway at least?
This is the news.
Smack-a-macabre, it's time for the only news that matters. And you don't have to look very far to find positive stories about Eddie Van Halen. The innovative guitarist player turned heads with his shredding style, unique tone, and the ability to write riffs that were equal parts melodic and upbeat. When you look for comments about the guitarist, the majority of the people highlight the positive aspects of his playing with David Lee Roth. Tony Iommi once spoke about Van Halen, recalling how shocked he was when they took the band out on tour and he heard Eddie play the guitar for the first time. He said Eddie was playing things I'd never seen before. And of course he set up a whole new load of players playing like that. And now I can't believe some of them. I can't follow it. I certainly couldn't do it. While general positivity surrounds a guitar player, there was always a bit of tension between Van Halen and Rush. Geddy Lee was never a big fan of Eddie, and it all stemmed from a gig they two were going to do in the same city. He said, "We're going to go back in time now. Back a year's time to England," said David Lee Roth, recalling the incident. "We'd just finished playing, great show, everybody was up, it was Michael Anthony's birthday, and we'd come back to the bar, and Rush was staying at the same hotel." Van Halen wasn't aware that Rush was also staying at the same hotel, and that's where the tension started. Said they rented the bar with all the booze in it. And our guys didn't know that. And they came in and said, "What? Free booze? Whoa." And they cleaned the place out, which put the guys on the edge a little bit. The real friction came when Rush returned to the bar. While they were happy to share the alcohol with the band, when Geddy Lee started showing some Rush tapes to Eddie in his drunken state, he ended up ruining the record. Geddy was playing some Rush tape on a tape recorder. He said something to Ed, and Ed's beer got into the tape recorder. Well, that caused a little friction. While the Van Halen boys believe the mistakes are made, Lee never got over the stolen alcohol and destroying the tape recorder. The band found out about this, and the next time they met in Las Vegas and realized that Rush had banned all of them, including the road crew, from attending their party after the show. Said Rush is playing before Van Halen in Las Vegas, and word goes out that nobody from Van Halen is allowed into the show at all. Nobody, no road crew, nobody, said David Lee Roth. Now Geddy Lee tried to find Eddie after the show to clear the air, and when approaching, the guitarist ended up getting rugby tackled by one of his bodyguards. There was ongoing tension between the two bands ever since, and it all started with a spilt beer. Yeah, that is some wild stuff. And I remember back in the day, David Lee Roth always picked on Rush and Journey. Those were the two bands that he was focused on in interviews. And then, yeah, I know on stage he goofed on the Clash. Only people to put iced tea in Jack Daniel bottle is the Clash, baby. And then on the 1984 tour, he said the same thing, but instead of saying the Clash, he said Quiet Riot. But in interviews, I've seen several interviews where he uses Rush and Journey as examples. And he even says in those interviews that he actually likes both bands. But he says, I look at it as professional wrestling, and that's why he does it, because of wrestling stuff, to goof on both bands. But though he liked both bands, and fortunate for AC/DC, them meeting Van Halen was very pleasant. He said that when they played the Monsters of Rock in England, that he saw Eddie, and Eddie was just so happy to see him. He gave him a big hug and excited, and the one thing I remember is that he had this big smile from ear to ear, this big grin. He talked a lot, faster than how I talk. He was excited we were on the same show. We liked hanging out, especially with Malcolm, because they could go on afterwards to a bar or somewhere, or he'd go off with Brian Johnson and play a dart game. To me, he was just like full of life. Angus said the last time he saw Eddie Van Halen was at an AC/DC show in San Bernardino, California, while on tour support of the 2000s album, Stiff Upper Lip. He said, he was exactly the same as when I last seen him. Big smile, big hug, very happy to see me, very happy to see Mal. He loved Mal. He had a very tight bond with Mal. The saddest part was hearing when his throat cancer had come back. He still hoped that he would have gotten through that. So it was a big loss for everyone in the musical world, yes. And obviously for his family and anyone that was close with him. So yeah, and Eddie Van Halen went on to say that his favorite riff that Angus has ever done was Down Payment Blues. Eddie Van Halen first saw AC/DC play live in July 23rd, 1978, when the two bands opened for Aerosmith on Day on the Green in Oakland, California. The guitarist later remembered that he was sitting backstage in Van Halen's dressing room trailer when he heard the rumbling, pounding noise from the stage, and he walked out to witness 60,000 people bopping up and down at the same time. I was standing on the side of the stage going, we have to follow these motherfuckers? Eddie Van Halen recalled. They were so fucking powerful. In a new interview with Talk Is Jericho, the Australian guitarist also recalls receiving a random call from his California counterpart in the dead of the night in 1980, where Eddie Van Halen informed him that he was considering Young a bad motherfucker. I was tired, went to sleep, so my wife picked up the phone. And she's talking on the phone, so I'm thinking, must be someone from home. But it was Eddie. She passed the phone to me, and she said, Eddie is on the phone. And I'm like, Eddie the fuck who? And he was on the phone going, hey man, you're a real bad motherfucker, yeah. But it's 2 a.m. The two men finally met face to face when the bands were booked to play the Monsters of Rock Festival at Donington Park in '84, with Eddie Van Halen appearing as special guest headliners to AC/DC. So there you go. So yeah, they didn't like, Rush didn't like them. They were a rambunctious band, and yeah, they are polar opposites if you think about it. You know, Rush is technical, where Van Halen was meat and potatoes, but I can see how both bands can respect each other, because they are two badass bands. But it's funny how Eddie burned that bridge with Geddy, but he didn't do that with Angus, man. And he has gone on praising Powerade a lot, and the song Riff Raff, and you know, and Down Payment Blues, considered the greatest, one of the greatest riffs ever written. So Eddie had a lot of respect for Angus Young, and I'm sure he did for Rush as well. And it's pretty wild to think that both Eddie Van Halen and Neil Peart died on the same year in the same hospital. That's amazing, you know? What most people consider the greatest drummer of all time, and most people consider the greatest guitar player of all time, died on the same year in the same hospital. That is some wild stuff, man. And what sadness those two brought to the world during a very sad time, during the pandemic. Where Neil, I think, was a little before the pandemic started. But honestly, man, it was dark. And seeing, you know, first Neil and then Eddie die, to me it was heartbreaking, man. It really hurt. You know, knowing that I'm never going to see them ever again. Even though I already thought I was never going to see Neil again. That's why I flew to New Orleans to see that final tour, because they didn't come down here. So, yeah, I got to see his final tour. And little did I know, in 2015, I got to see Eddie Van Halen's final tour. And the amount of times I've seen Van Halen, the very last time I saw Van Halen, I caught one of his guitar picks. Totally amazing night. But anyway, what do you all think of, you know, Rush banning Van Halen and Van Halen embracing AC/DC? Leave it in the comments below. And thank you so much for watching The Only News That Matters. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't. Ring that little notification bell. And if you are subscribed to my channel, please check to see if you're still subscribed, because people are getting unsubscribed for no reason. And that blows, man. And like the video. It's good for the YouTube algorithms. So stay frosty, listen to Black Sabbath, and smack 'em a gob.
Farewell and adieu to you fair Spanish ladies.
Farewell and adieu, you ladies of Spain, for we've received orders for to sail back to Boston, and so never more shall we see you again.